Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Vining, and I have a special treat for you today. I have invited Laura Garrison-Brook to visit with us. I have known Laura now for, oh gosh, it's maybe going on 4 years, maybe longer than that. Who knows? I think I skipped the COVID year, so I'm not even sure. It may be 5 years. But anyway, we have been, I guess, cohorts in a venture of positive psychology and positive education that has been a real adventure. And so I've gotten to know her. She has a nonprofit called yeah. Let me make sure I've got that. Uh, Discovering your purpose. I'll have to edit that out. That's for sure. But anyway, discovering your purpose.
Discovering my purpose.
Discovering my purpose.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I think, focused more on college students and kids that maybe are at risk or at-risk kids, and has been doing a great work with that over the last several years. So I've asked her to come on and share some things that may help us understand kids that are experiencing and or have experienced a traumatic event, that actually discovering their purpose might be just what they need to try to help some. So I'm going to say thank you, Laura, and welcome. And what I would like for her to do to start off with is to share just a little bit about her story, so that you kind of know a little bit about her. So,
thank you, Bill. Thank you for the invitation to join in this amazing effort of yours, and thanks for digging in to this very necessary topic. And thanks to all of the teachers who are working to educate yourselves upon how best to help your students. And I'm so sorry and sad that you are probably running into this more frequently than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm so grateful to be here to be able to share, my experiences, both personally and, as an educator, and what I've seen, both for the experience of the student, what I've learned, and also how I've seen that purpose can be a true protective factor with those who've experienced trauma. It can be a path back to a more productive life. Yeah, awesome. So, a bit about me. Bill asked me in preparation for this call if I personally had experienced trauma. And I actually walked through the ACEs test again, and my number is 5. So wow. Yes. Yeah, I have experienced trauma as a child. So, this work is deeply resonant with me for that reason. And specifically to why I created Discovering My Purpose. As Bill mentioned, it's a nonprofit organization. And yes, we serve youth ages 14 to 24 years of age. That's our key decade. And, our focus is helping them live happier, more meaningful lives. And the way that I came to this work is that when I was 18 years old, I was off for my very first semester of college when I got word that a very good friend of mine had committed suicide.
Ooh.
And he was the best and brightest of us in our graduating class at high school. And he went off to Cornell, being very used to being a big fish in a small pond, and he did not do well, did not have any coping skills. And rather than returning home, with poor grades and, feeling vulnerable, he chose to take his own life. And that, honestly, it devastated me. Yeah. Not only because we lost him, and I loved him, but also because of the choice that he made and the fact that it could have been so different if his life had unfolded differently. So that happened, like I said, when I was 18 years old, and decades went by, and he was still very much in my mind. And I went off and pursued, honestly, a different path. I was in charge of international relations for a different nonprofit organization, but I always knew it wasn't my purpose. And, and that voice kept getting louder and louder, where I was like, oh man, this is fun, traveling all over the world. It's amazing, but it's not my purpose. And then I finally said, okay, enough. And I had the opportunity to study with an amazing positive psychologist. I'm Harvard trained. His name is Dr. Tal Ben-Shahar. And that set me on an entirely new life path where I realized, okay, this is my purpose, is to help other people find their purpose. Because if Adam, this friend of mine, had had a better sense of who he was, I think that would have helped him navigate that rough first semester, rather than, taking such a permanent solution to what was really a temporary problem.
Yeah.
So that's my background.
Well, fantastic. As I'm listening to your story, I'm thinking how many kids out there are in that same situation, and how many teachers are talking to kids that you absolutely don't know that this is the case. And what can be done, and how can you maybe notice some of these and identify some of these. So as we go through this, I'd like for you to address that, but also to keep in mind for everyone that's watching this, that this is not just something for kids that have gone through trauma. This is for everyone. We know, for instance, that in our lifetime, everyone will experience trauma. And so this is something that will help build resilience. It'll help build who they are as a person, build that efficacy. So that's why I'm so excited to have you explain a little bit. So
Yeah.
go ahead and share maybe what you think could help with these teachers and these kids.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Bill. And I want this conversation to be as tactical and implementable as possible. So I'm really going to work, in that direction, so that you all have some tools that you can immediately bring into your classroom, because I know what you want. So some background here, and I know that your course and your conversations talk quite a bit about the brain. And I would love to touch upon it as well, because it is so incredibly critical to understand how, a traumatized brain is different than, a brain of a child who has not experienced trauma. So, you can have two students come into your classroom and they can sit down and they can both be well-dressed, groomed. They can have had breakfast that, morning. They could have had 8 hours of sleep the previous night, but one of their brains might be ready to learn and the other one might not. And for the traumatized student, I've got this brilliant book. It's called The Deepest Well. And I wanted to read a quick snippet out of here that is from Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. And what she found, referring to ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, is that the more symptoms a child had, the higher his cortisol levels. And remember, cortisol levels are those stress hormones. So the higher the cortisol levels were, and the smaller the volume of his or her hippocampus. And, if the hippocampus, you're like, okay, well, what does that mean? The hippocampus is the part of the brain that helps us transition from short-term memory to long-term memory. So it is critical for learning. And even more alarming, if a child experiences one traumatic event, they then went in and they measured the hippocampus again 12 to 18 months later and found that the hippocampi of those traumatized children were even smaller.
Wow.
So if there's not an intervention where, we help these children, internalize what happened and come to terms with it, they continue to suffer from a learning standpoint. And as teachers, I think we really need to be mindful of that, because it's not necessarily something that's worn on their faces, because they can show up in the classroom looking very much like a student who hasn't experienced trauma. But in reality, their brains are very different. So, that's one thing to be mindful of. And the other
Now,
thing,
let me ask you
yeah,
this. As I
yeah.
was growing up,
Mhm.
uh, if we knew somebody that was having a difficult time or doing so, our comment back to them may be just grow up. But
Mhm.
what you're saying is this is not something necessarily that a person can control. It's something that has happened and rewired in their brain.
Mhm. Yeah, and the word, what I've often heard is that and this can happen also physiologically from a failure to thrive with ACEs. They've shown that, and Dr. Harris in her book The Deepest Well goes through and beautifully illustrates stories about how ACEs tie to failure to thrive. But it means that the development of the brain can actually get hung. Like if you think about it like a computer, it can arrest the development of the brain. And that's why with some of these students, you might look at their, maturity levels, their self-regulation, and they can be grades below, fellow students. And it might be because they've experienced trauma. And another thing that's fascinating about the brain, I love the brain, is if you think about a teeter-totter, we've got two key areas of our brain. We've got our prefrontal cortex. This is all of our executive functioning, self-regulation, planning, purpose, all lives here. Strategic thinking, all here, the prefrontal cortex. And then we've got the limbic center. Okay, the limbic center is where the amygdala lives. That's our like fight or flight. It's our survival brain. And what's fascinating is it's like a teeter-totter. When our limbic center is on, our prefrontal cortex is off. So when our students come in and they're flooded with all these stress hormones, it means that their prefrontal cortex, which we need to learn, which we need to self-regulate, is off. Because it's not like you can have both on at the same time. And that's why we've got the cool part of the brain and the hot part of the brain. And you've probably experienced that yourself when you've had that moment of like, rawr, and all rationality, right? Sometimes all maturity goes out the window
Yep, happens
because,
too much.
right?
Yes.
It happens sometimes to all of us. But with these vulnerable teens, it happens more, or vulnerable children, excuse me. Vulnerable children, it happens more because they've got what's called a dysregulated stress response, because they're constantly flooded with cortisol. And that comes with a whole host of physiological results, including effect of the brain, because it literally means that their system is inflamed. They are on fire. They're on fire, and it's hard to learn when you're on fire, right? So that's something that, we as educators need to be mindful of. So I've got some things to share that are both short-term and long-term fixes. Because again, I want to be really practical with how this can land with you. Short-term fixes is, just connecting to the breath. And there are brilliant, resources out there where you can just, encourage your students to take a breath. The 4-square breath is really good, where, you inhale to a count of 4, you hold to a count of 4, exhale to a count of 4, and then hold the breath externally to a count of 4. It's 4-square breath. Okay. That's one. Amy Cuddy, Cuddy, is a fascinating researcher that's found, a huge amount of information on how we hold our bodies physically and how that affects our hormones. So what that means, and this is again unfortunate, is that when we do this, okay, when we're down, I know my camera isn't all that great right now, my camera angle, when we're down like this, and when are we down like this? When we're on our phone, when we're texting, right? We're down, nose down. This kind of a curved in, the shoulders in, kind of almost protecting the heart. She's shown that boosts cortisol levels in the body. You're not doing anything. You're not feeling scared. You're just prompted to take that body position, and cortisol levels go up. When our shoulders are back, when our hands are on our hips, when we're taking up a lot of space, kind of like almost like a Superman pose, our testosterone rises, and that's a good thing. Okay. It means that our confidence level goes up and our cortisol goes down. So if you're in a place where you just need, your kids to just kind of, come to quiet, 4 square breath. And if you feel like kids are really anxious, like maybe before a test, get them on their feet, hands on their hips, elbows out, and have them breathe in like a Superman pose, Superwoman pose. 2 minutes. 2 minutes, they've proven that it affects the hormones of our children. So maybe you have them on their feet, hands on their hips, elbows out while you're reviewing or taking roll. I mean,
is a great, I'm just telling you, that is a great tool that everybody can use in every classroom. Absolutely. Okay, fantastic.
Yeah, and effectively, it's anything that they take up space, right? Like crossing the ankles, putting the feet up on the desk, that's also a power pose. So things where they take up space, that's good for confidence. It's good. And for traumatized children, no matter how they're showing up in the classroom, their confidence levels are probably bad, probably low. So these kinds of power poses, and Amy Cuddy has a brilliant TED Talk where she models some of these and talks about the research. So if you want to give a look to that, it's I would definitely recommend that. Another short-term suggestion for you all is that as you hear, and we're going to talk, tying this more clearly to purpose, and the different elements of purpose, but I'd really invite you to listen to the messages that your young people are sharing about themselves. And, from a strength standpoint, and just to talk about where we find purpose in the intersection. If you think about like a Venn diagram with these interlapping circles, with right in the center where all of the circles, overlap, that's where we find our purpose. And the circles are what we're good at, what we love to do, and what the world needs. Okay, those 3 things: what we're good at, what we love to do, and what the world needs.
Yeah.
And then right there in the center, that's where our ripe, fertile area is for where we can find our purpose. So with children who have experienced trauma, what you're good at is a minefield. It's a minefield. And I've witnessed this, because as an educator, I've gone into group foster homes, I've gone into homeless shelters, teaching our program. And, one of the things we dig into is, what are you good at? And I've witnessed, and I'm sure that you as teachers, you've witnessed the same thing, where you ask your students, what are you good at? And they're blank. They're totally blank. And if they say something, right, they get nothing.
Yeah.
They get nothing. And if they say something, it might be kind of like they don't really believe it. And I have talked to so many people who work with children, and they've said the same. And what's sad is that I think that this extends beyond those who have been traumatized, although it's worse with people who are traumatized. And I'll talk in a second about why. Because what I've witnessed, which drives me crazy, is I've said to my students, okay, when you need to get a sense of if you're doing something well, where do you go? And they'll look at me and they'll say, YouTube. And I'm like, okay, do you see what you're doing? You're going out to a community of millions of people and comparing your skill, skateboarding, playing the flute, shooting basketball, whatever it is, to the probably one of the best people who've risen up, on YouTube or TikTok or wherever it is. I mean, talk about setting yourself up to fail, right? And that's where they really need our help as leaders, as educators, is strength spotting. And there are some amazing tools. One of them is called Values in Action. That's the one we use within our program, which has a youth survey. It's 70 questions long. So it takes kids typically around 10 minutes based on their reading reading level. That's for as young as 7-year-olds, up to 18-year-olds. And this goes through and it identifies what their signature strengths are. And it can be a great thing for you to do with your students, to give them a sense of, okay, this is what you're good at. This is what you're good at. And in that way, you can then, possibly as a teacher, start like watching for, especially if you have some vulnerable students, you can start, strength spotting. Oh, John, I see how, your creativity came to play in that project you just made. Or I witnessed your honesty. What were you going to jump in with, Bill?
Well, I will say, as you have seen this in the different surveys that you've seen
Mhm.
kids take, how many of the kids took the survey and then came back and went, "Oh, I didn't know I was I didn't know I was strong in that. I didn't know that
Yeah,
was one of my strengths," and
for
kind of
sure.
got excited about it.
Yeah, and sometimes, especially with traumatized youth, they usually don't react with excitement. They usually react with a certain amount of, I don't want to say dismissal. Dismissal is not the right word. They're a little bit
Almost like
doubtful.
they don't deserve it.
They're doubtful.
Yeah.
It's not that it's that they're doubtful. And one of the things I've witnessed, and it's understandable because here they are with this life experience where they've witnessed their caregivers, who have crashed through life, and that's been their life experience, and they come at life from a place of, they a lot of them have a true victim mentality,
Yeah.
and a lot of them are very apathetic. And that's where this kind of work can be tremendously powerful, and one of the things to break down, to understand, when you define human agency, because very often traumatized youth have very low agency. It's
Right.
broken into three things: creativity, okay, which they may have, they may not have; optimism, typically optimism, very, very low with traumatized youth; and self-efficacy. Okay, I believe I can do it. Okay, I have hope that I can do it, and I believe that I can do it. And that's where, as educators, we need to help them connect the dots. We need to give them permission, and encourage them to envision a more hopeful future. And we need to help strength spot and give them a sense of, you do have a purpose within you. You do have, a unique way that you can contribute to the world. And let's explore that together. And we'll talk more about, different ways that as educators we can have those conversations.
One
So
of the things in our schools today, that's going on, to what you're saying resonates with me, because so many kids are have checked out of even
mhm,
learning. And
yeah.
so bringing that back where that engagement is there
Mhm,
could be huge with all the students.
mhm.
So fantastic, great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And one of the phrases that I love from Professor Bill Damon, who is the director of Stanford's Center for Adolescence, is he says that our youth are adrift.
Yeah.
Our youth are adrift, and he came to this conclusion ages before COVID. So when you're adrift, you don't have a North Star, you don't have a sense of how you can meaningfully contribute to the world, purpose. And then the waters get rough, it becomes a much rougher ride. And that's what the majority of our students have experienced,
Yeah.
whether or not they've experienced trauma. And depending on their set of, their general character, are they more likely to be anxious? I mean, COVID itself has been traumatizing for, students who otherwise, probably would be in a different emotional space. So it's definitely, it's been a challenging period of time, as if I needed to even say that. So Okay, so still in the short term things, we've talked about breath work, we've talked about Amy Cuddy, her power poses. As you're hearing your students talk about themselves, especially if they're apathetic or, doubting themselves, using the power of yet, which comes from another Stanford researcher, Professor Carol Dweck. And Carol Dweck, you might be familiar with her name. She's the researcher who created the growth mindset. She's been one of the key proponents of growth mindset. And she says that there's this magical word and it's yet. So that when our students say, I just don't understand, algebra at all, you can say, yet. You don't understand it yet. You're not good enough to get on the team yet. And this pivots them from more of a fixed mindset of I don't have what it takes and I never will, where a lot of our traumatized youth are, okay, because they don't believe in themselves, to being more open. Like, okay, with effort, with time, you can get there. You can get there, by just keep showing up. That's the power of yet. So that's another thing that I would invite you to come bring into your classroom so you can help shift, that mindset with your students. So, and the last short-term thing that comes to mind is just talking to them about failure, about how incredibly important failure is. And the positive psychologist that I studied with, Dr. Talpan Shahar, he said, if you fail to learn, you learn to fail, because you have to understand how to fail. That's just part of our learning process. None of us are going to get it right all of the time. But for those who are vulnerable and feel like it's very hard for them to put themselves out there, they can effectively just give up and say, I'm not going to try, because, all they feel like they've experienced is failure. So, helping them, and there's some great stories out there with people who are, fabulous failures. Like Michael Jordan's got a great quote around failure and how, how many shots he's missed and how many games he's lost and everything, that can be really inspiring for students.
And how many strikeouts that
there you go.
Has versus how many home runs is
Yeah,
Yogi
exactly.
Berra. And so I listened to a clip with the lady that developed the Spanx clothing line, and she said every day when she was growing up, every night that she came home, her dad would say, "How many times did you fail today?" And she went, "What? How many times did you fail today?" And they would talk about at their evening table the failures. And she said she grew up thinking, well, failure is just part of the process. And we live in America today where a lot of times failure is looked at as failure, whereas failure absolutely should be looked at as part of that growth and part of that growth mindset, which you said. So well, really glad you brought that up.
Yeah. And I've got a great image, which, is like what people think success looks like. And it's a very straight line from lower, and it goes up with like an arrow, very smooth. And they're like, what success actually looks like? Success actually looks like, and it's this very squiggly and it's all over the place, line, which is generally still going upwards, but with lots of downward trends, that's, and again, I think it's the fact that social media puts it out there of, oh gosh, I put this song out and it was a smash hit, and I've done this, I've done that. And for us as adults, sometimes it can be hard to parse through and not feel a bit depressed by, oh, their life looks so much shinier and more pretty than mine. And for our young people, it just becomes literally, emotional firebomb after emotional firebomb. And that can really play on their well-being.
And even the kids that have gone through trauma, then it's easy for them to look at themselves as failures and actually take some of that upon themselves and thinking that it's their fault. So
for sure. Absolutely. Or, this is the path that my parents took, and that's the likely path that I will take as
Yeah.
well.
Right.
And that's something that, again, purpose can create a really protective factor, against that kind of thinking. So, so again, just to talk about, what purpose is, we've mentioned it's what you're good at, what you love to do, and what the world needs, and looking at that central place of, where all those things overlap. So more long-term efforts with, how you, in the classroom can help your young people, connect to a greater sense of purpose. One is just, asking them the question, hey, have you thought about, what kind of mark you'd like to leave on the world? And there's a good chance that you will be the first person who's ever asked them that question.
Wow.
And just making some space, like building it in, whether it's just, part of homeroom, or whether you can tie it to, a social studies lesson. Very, very much encourage sharing your own path to purpose. How did you choose to become an educator? What lit you up? Because that can be really inspiring, even if the young people don't potentially want to be teachers, but just seeing, and having you share, I had moments of doubt. It wasn't clear right from the beginning, because it virtually never is. So they can, understand that, because sometimes young people assume that it's like a bolt from the blue. If it's my purpose, it's got to be like an epiphany. It's never an epiphany. It's never an epiphany. It's a spark. It's a spark of curiosity. It's a spark of interest. So, that's another thing to ask them. When have you gotten really curious about something? What was it? Where were you? Were you here at school? Were you, out with family? Were you out with friends? What did it look like? And that can be a really fun conversation to see how that unfolds, and see, especially if you're, in a classroom space, see what your students come up with.
Yeah.
And come up, have examples of your own, so that it's not
So
just dead space.
I'm going to ask you something here that a little bit off track here, but how does that maybe fit into building resilience with kids through their entire life?
Well, there have been huge, study after study after study has shown that, children who are purposeful, and adults who are purposeful, are more resilient. And again, Bill Damon has a quote that I love, which I actually wrote down so I could not paraphrase, I could get it right. And he says that purpose endows a person with joy in good times and resilience in hard times. And this holds true all throughout life. And the reason that it holds true, and the reason that it makes us more resilient, is that when we're plugged into something that's purposeful, remember, it's what you love to do, what you're good at, and what the world needs. Okay. So when you have those bumps, when you have those downturns, when things don't go as expected, you keep coming back to it because you love to do it. Okay, I'm not being, I haven't experienced success yet, but I love to do it. So I'm going to come back to it again. So that boosts your perseverance, and that's part of resilience, right? Is that, with failure 1 or failure 10 or failure 20, you pick yourself back up and you come back at it. It's like, Thomas Edison, right? When he was interviewed around, this journalist came to him and said, dude, you've tried 10,000 times to create a light bulb and it's not working. Shouldn't you give up? And he says, I haven't failed 10,000 times. I've just found 10,000 ways that don't work. So that's the important thing with purpose, is that we make that shift where we're like, I love this, and this is important. This is the way I contribute to the world. I haven't figured it out yet, but I'm going to. And that makes us more resilient, for sure.
And that kind of fits in with the growth mindset also with that. Well, fantastic. Okay, good. I think it's good where we're going with this, Laura, I think is fantastic because so many teachers out there are struggling to find something that
Mhm.
they can do that's helping, and we always look for that little that magic, and there's
Mhm.
not a whole lot of magic sometimes, but
Mhm.
in but what'll happen by giving them this purpose,
Mhm.
you'll see a whole different spark in these kids that'll light up. So
Yeah. Yeah.
fantastic.
Well, and inviting them, right?
Yeah.
Inviting them and sending the message of we all have purpose. We all have purpose. We all have different ways that we can contribute to the world. And letting them know that it's not an epiphany. Everybody's got it. If you don't know what it is right now, you're normal. You're totally normal, because there can be, I think, a whole imposter syndrome where our students look out at others and they're like, well, he's got it together and she's got it together. Everybody's got it together but me,
Yeah.
right? And when you say, the reality is that only around 20% of our students say that they know what their purpose is. And what's ironic is only about 20 to 25% of adults say what their purpose is. So a lot of us are going through life pretty directionless, just going to the school because, oh, my friends apply to that school. I'm choosing this profession because it's the way I'm going to be able to, feel like I'll be the best compensated. And it's not driven by what I love to do, what, I'm good at, or what the world needs. So figuring out our why is tremendously powerful and it's tremendously empowering. So, and that makes a big difference with all children, with all humans, but especially those who are traumatized. Something else to share, just to kind of back it up a little bit, but I wanted to share this with you all because it's been so incredibly powerful for me, is that when we're teaching our young people, we start off with a class on the brain. And we use Professor Jonathan Haidt's analogy, which is called the elephant and the rider. And if you look that up, and Haidt is Haidt, there's some really cool videos on YouTube that are pretty short and you could show to your students. And what's fascinating is that he uses the analogy where the rider is our prefrontal cortex and the elephant is our limbic center. And the picture is that you've got this little itty bitty rider on this big old powerful elephant. And especially with our young people who have been traumatized, the elephant is massive because remember, that's the survival part of our brain, the limbic center. Prefrontal cortex, which is all about self-regulation, strategic planning, all of these things, little. And we walk the students through explaining, the way that the elephant and the rider, sometimes partner very well and sometimes don't partner at all. And when you have those moments of making a decision, like, hey, I'm going to study really hard for math because, I want to be a better student. I want to be successful. And then your friends call you up. Hey, let's go to the mall. Hey, let's go, watch a movie. And you're like, yeah. Okay. That kind of reaction is like a habitual reaction from the elephant. And the reason that this is so powerful with traumatized students is it helps you shift them out of that victim mentality where you're saying to them, it's not that you aren't good at making goals. It's not that you're broken. It's just the way that your brain is wired. Your elephant, sometimes just kind of, takes you in a different direction. And there are ways that you can work through to train your elephant where, you ask them to just like, oh, there's my elephant again, mindfulness practice. Oh, there he is telling me to spend money, even though I've decided to save, or eat cookies, even though I'm on a diet. So you name it, you frame it like, I'm not really hungry. I just, I'm bored, whatever. That's why I'm going to eat that cookie. And then you do something else. Okay. So you name it, you explain it, and then you refocus. Name it, explain it, refocus. And this kind of an approach is tremendously empowering for these students, because they might have been in a place where they thought, okay, I can never set a goal, because again, their elephants are so wild. But if you explain, this is why it's happening, and this is how to make, a difference, it really, like, I can see them in class. They just like, oh, okay, all right.
Yeah.
And you just give them the sense of, this is how to shift. And it gets them out of the place of being the victim and into the place of, okay, I can be in the driver's seat. I can have that greater sense of efficacy. I can have greater optimism, so that their agency goes up.
And that's again something that you use with all kids instead of kids that have gone through some traumatic experience. Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great stuff just in giving practical application there. Name it.
Yeah. So when you're training your elephant, you name it. Like, I see it. I see my elephant. Name it, and then you explain it. That's just, yeah. And with the explain it, it's just, you can just have it be something super simple. That's just my elephant being hard on me. Because a lot of times it's not about action, it's about self-talk. Oh, Laura, you can't do that. You're not good enough for that. You're not smart enough for that. That's just my elephant being hard on me. And in our class, we actually have a sheet of paper where we've got a drawing of an elephant, and we color our elephant in, and we name our elephant. So my elephant's name is Bessie. That's just Bessie being hard on me. Bessie's being hard on me. And then you just do something to get you out of that rut, because you're rewiring your brain. You're rewiring the way that you habitually think. And it gives the students a sense of control over these runaway, thoughts that they sometimes have.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Awesome. So, couple of other things that are definitely directly tied to purpose to share. One of them, when it comes down to all the different paths to purpose, there are so many. As we mentioned, there's just that spark, of, oh, I'm curious about this. They're, looking out into the world. How would I like the world to be a different place? And one really powerful way to purpose is looking at your own life and, the challenges you had, and maybe it was, hey, I, experienced illness, or I experienced neglect from my parents, or I was a victim of domestic violence. And it's possible that those life experiences could be very rich soil for their purpose in life. And it's something that you have to be, it's like a treading lightly place where you can say, hey, and the way to frame it up is probably, how would you like the world to be different? Where have you had experiences where you wish that life had unfolded differently? Yeah. So you're lightly, giving them the example, the opportunity to think about their background. And could you connect that to a way that you could contribute to things being better in the future? And that, can, again, fuel very, very powerful, purposes within the students. And that directly, ties to the opportunity to help connect our students to post-traumatic growth. Uh-huh. And this involves something like, which is called a cognitive reframe. And the way to think about post-traumatic growth, if you've never heard about that phrase, I think we've all heard about PTSD, which is much more commonly known. And post-traumatic growth is, when we ask ourselves, okay, why did this happen? And what does it mean? And when I'm teaching, post-traumatic growth to my students, I often use an example of like a young woman who's dating, a young man, and she finds out he's been cheating on her. And she's like, of course, like, really angry and upset. And she, and what I always point out is, in that moment, there is no opportunity for post-traumatic growth. In that moment of, she's just found out, she is on fire angry. And when you have those moments, you say to yourself, okay, I don't know yet why this happened, but I will in time. And you just kind of like, give yourself space to settle, space to, to come to a place of maybe a little bit more of a cool head. And then, you ask, okay, well, what did I learn from this? And you can go in two different directions. It's like Nietzsche says, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. That's not always true. That's not always true. Where if this young woman, comes to the conclusion of, guys are always horrible, they're cheats, I can't ever trust anyone ever again. That's not her being stronger. But if instead she says, I learned that, this is what I really valued out of that relationship. And I learned that this is important to me from a relationship standpoint. I need to be able to trust my partner. And I've learned to pay attention to certain signs, but I'm open. My heart is still open. So it's life affirming what we've learned and coaching, again, your students in a way that's appropriate, because you need to be sure that you're not minimizing, their trauma, but you can say, what do we have to learn? How can we have that make sense? How can we possibly contribute to that not happening again in the future? That connects the dots so that post-traumatic growth is more likely to happen. And again, that can be really powerful for those who have experienced trauma.
Well, it gives something to the kids that at this point in their life, they're kind of taking a downturn to where they go, how can I use this for positive and use it on an upturn? I know they've done a lot of studies with PTSD soldiers that have come back that have had PTSD and changed this into PTG with amazing results. So
yeah, for sure. And it's the cognitive reframe, right? The cognitive reframe is when we say to ourselves, okay, something bad happened, and you reframe it. So it's like looking for the silver lining. Like, my at the time, he was, I think, 7 or 8 years old, did a beautiful 7 or 8 year old son did a beautiful cognitive reframe where he slammed his own finger in the car door. I don't even know how he did that. And I immediately, got it open, and he looked at me with tears streaming down his face. It obviously really hurt him. And he says, I'm so lucky I could have broken it, So, and I was like, oh my gosh, love that child.
That's a pretty optimistic and positive person.
Yeah. But it's that kind of mentality, it's that kind of, I got in a car accident and my car is totaled, and I'm now having to ride my bike. I could have died. I'm losing weight because I'm having to bike everywhere. Those kinds of opportunities for cognitive reframe. Okay, how can we look at this and see it in a different light from a more positive aspect? And again, something that you have to be really, really careful with, because, for someone who has recently experienced trauma, any, message of you're trying to minimize my pain can result in a big flare of anger, justifiable anger, understandable anger. But again, having those moments where you can kind of judge the room and say, where are the places where we can look at this and say, how am I lucky? What are the ways that I can look and appreciate what's good? And one of the things to share that I love, one of my favorite stories, is as part of our program, we do a pre-program emotional baseline assessment and a post-program emotional baseline assessment. And one of the things that we measure is satisfaction in life. And I went into a group foster home of teenage girls, and these girls had experienced significant neglect. Most of them had also been sexually abused. And I asked them at the beginning of every class from day one. I was only with them for 6 Sundays. I said to them, tell me the best part of your week. What's the best part of your week? And the first time that I asked them that, all of them sat there totally blank. Not a single one of them had an answer. Okay. And again, this is really normal. It's extremely normal. With a traumatized brain, you focus, it's a narrowed, focus where we narrow on the threat. It's the way our brains are wired. What could hurt me? What could, where are the threats? That's what I'm looking for. And when, instead you say, okay, what's going well in my life? That's called a broaden and build. It's a broadening of the perspective. Professor Barbara Fredrickson from UNC Chapel Hill has done a lot of research on this. So every single week. And then I would say at the end of class, keep an eye out for your best thing, because I'm going to ask you about it at the beginning of class next week. And the second week I was there, they had some answers. And I'd say to them, it could be anything. Favorite dessert, heard a funny joke, anything. And at the end of that time with these students, we had them go through that emotional baseline assessment again, and their life satisfaction scores in those 6 short weeks had gone up 92%. 92%. And it's because of the fact that they started paying attention to what was working well. Yeah, they're still living in a group foster home. Yeah, they're still living lives which are pretty challenging, but they were paying attention. They'd share with me, hey, I had a chance to go into court and I saw my brother for the first time in, a month. And that was awesome.
In our program here, one of the things that we start off with was just the 3 good things, what are the 3 good things that have happened to you. So just changing that to get their minds focused on some optimistic types of things and good things. So how's a teacher going to use that?
Well, I would say that you can use it in the classroom, just as like an icebreaker. Hey, what was the best part of the weekend? And the thing that's important, because it feels fluffy, it's not fluffy. And again, if you look at Barbara Fredrickson's work, she shares that it's been proven that people who have a broader perspective, where they're taking in the good, are more creative. They're able to make better social connections. They feel, calmer. I mean, there's so many different emotional impacts on our students. So it's honestly, it's a great investment of your time. And it can feel like it's just like while you're loading the PowerPoint or whatever, tell me what was the best part of your week. Yeah. And really, do your best to make sure that everyone contributes, if not every single time, that you do. For those who are hanging back, you say, hey, I'm going to ask you tomorrow, what was the best part of your day, so that they're looking, because and that just the fact that they're looking makes a shift
exactly
in their emotions.
Yeah.
It's awesome.
We are running into about an hour with this, and it's been fantastic. Let's in kind of, and I'm saying finishing up. It's not that we have to keep this to an hour, but I want to try to move it to where it's not too far here. What do you think? What do you think that your business and your I don't want to say business, but your focus and your purpose in life right now, where have you made the greatest impact, and where could these teachers then, I think, have the greatest impact on their students?
Well, I think the greatest impact that we've had at discovering my purpose is we've helped students navigate through some really challenging times. Because what we've consistently seen is that purposeful students their anxiety levels drop precipitously. What we've tracked is anxiety typically drops around 30%. And we use something called the Generalized Anxiety Disorder 7, GAD-7 is the questionnaire we use. So, and these children are beyond the pale anxious. And this was, a lot of the stats that I pull from are pre-COVID. And anxiety has only gone up since COVID happened. So to me, that feels, and an anxious brain is not a brain ready to learn. So when we give students a path, even if they come through these questions, not exactly knowing what their purpose is, but you've said to them, I invite you to start thinking about it. It's like a treasure hunt. And maybe you won't know right away what your purpose is, but you've got one. And, again, let's look into what you're good at. Let's look at what you love to do. And let's look at the way the world, what the world needs. And we'll keep exploring together so that you're inviting them to consider that they have a purpose. Because the reality is most of these children have never been encouraged to think about their purpose before because they've been in such a survival mode. So that's honestly that transformation of just inviting the students to start considering, their future in a more hopeful manner. It again boosts their optimism, helps boost their agency, and help the strength spot see them so that you can give them a better sense of, yeah, you can do this. You've got this. You've got this. Again, that boosts their belief in themselves. And that's going to result in a different learner. It's going to result in a student who isn't passive. It's going to result in a student who is engaged in the classroom. And I think that's the greatest gift, for the teacher, for the class as a whole, and for the student as an individual.
Yeah, and we wonder why kids out there today are not engaged, and that
Mhm.
the dropout rate is so high, and
Mhm.
and much of this could be because they don't see their purpose. They
Mhm.
have one that's there. But they don't necessarily. Um, they're not aware of it, and they're not
Yeah, they're not
self-aware of
connected,
it.
and
Yeah,
learning doesn't feel relevant.
right.
Learning doesn't feel relevant, and that's where purpose is the most powerful,
Yeah,
because all of a sudden learning becomes relevant because you can connect the dots. Oh, you want to be a nurse? Well, then let's make sure that that you dig into biology. Let's make sure that you at least have some basic math skills, so that all of a sudden they see, I need this in order
yeah,
to get there.
yeah.
And that shift, again, it's a sea change. I mean, it's transformational. I have seen it. I have seen it happen. It's incredibly powerful. And it makes us feel better as educators, to have students who want to be in the classroom, right?
Okay, is there is there a method to to teachers as kids come in their classroom, which is happening right now,
Mm-hmm.
and can they can they go through a process, or do you have like a formula? Or I know we're going to be adding your website and some of the
Mm-hmm.
resources that you've mentioned here at the end of this, but what would you suggest that they do? Because we've told them a lot, we've given them a lot.
Mm-hmm.
This is not just for kids that have gone through trauma. So what would you suggest?
Well, as you mentioned, we do have a program which is called In Pursuit of Purpose. So if you just want a plug and play program, I mean, reach out to us because we've got it all crafted. It's 5 hours of recorded content, which comes with a workbook and everything. So in that regard, that makes it easy. If you want to just have some conversations as you can fit it in to your day, just be mindful of the 3 pieces of purpose, so that you are, really asking students, what made you curious about this lesson? Was there anything that sparked your imagination? watch for those places of, oh, the students got engaged there. Why? What was that? And ask them, what was it? It seems like you guys were kind of into this lesson. What was it that lit you up here? So that you can dial in, more and more. You can see the nuances of, oh, they seem like they're into this. And then you pull that out of them. How can we, refine that curiosity of yours? How can we dig deeper? Because that's the path towards purpose, figuring out what they love. And then keep strength spotting. Hey, you're really good at that. Because so many of these children have never been told that they're good at anything. And that's why they have such self-doubt. I really see you. I really see that you're doing this well. And, helping them connect to their strengths. And if you have time, having your children go through the values in action survey, which is, again, it's free. It's on viacharacter.org. It's a youth survey. And then just keep on looking for ways that the world needs them. The world needs you. The world needs all of us. Create some service projects. What can we do as a class that's relevant and real? That we can bring, something out to the world. It can be a small thing. It doesn't have to be a big, YouTube, top fabulous, million likes kind of thing. But the fact that it's relevant and real, and it's going out into the world is really going to make a difference with your students, and show them that they can make a difference. Help them understand that. Because again, that's the path to purpose.
Anything else you would like to add, just to finish up here, that you think would be good for the teachers?
Well, I've got a giveaway, which
great.
I'd be happy to share with them, which is the 5 myths to purpose. And we've talked about some of them here, but those are just myth busters, so that as you're talking to your students, you can say to them, this isn't true. Because again, so many of them can just be like, oh, and feel, beaten down, like it's not for me, it's not possible, because of these myths in their minds. And give that document a read, so that you can help them understand what purpose is and what purpose isn't. So I'd love for you all to internalize that, and just, again, thank you so much for the work you do. I know it's hard, but it's so incredibly important, and I'm really grateful to all of you.
I was talking to my daughter last night, who is a preschool teacher, and she said she had already had 2 teachers quit this year. And of course, we're doing this on what is today, the 17th, I guess, of
August.
and you're thinking, oh my goodness, and they're scrambling to put paras in the. So we know that it's a tough thing, and she's saying the kids coming in are even tougher. And so these are some of the things, hopefully what we've done is to give you some tools that you can go out and to maybe change the mindsets of what these kids are thinking right now and coming in, and just wonderful stuff. And I wanted to thank you for the time that you put into this, and we will put all these resources, and thank you for the freebie that you're giving everyone, and we'll put again a link to that, and so that people have access to that. But again, thank you so much for what you're doing and what you're doing to help kids along the way. So thank you, Laura.
It's my pleasure, Bill. Thank you again for the invitation, and wishing you all well.
Thank you. Bye-bye.